There is a quiet force in the world that rarely announces itself. It does not shout. It does not threaten. It does not demand obedience with fear. Instead, it slips silently into conversations, relationships, workplaces, social circles, and even into the thoughts we believe are entirely our own. This force is manipulation. Not the dramatic kind seen in movies, but the subtle, invisible kind that influences decisions, emotions, and beliefs without people realizing what is happening. The Silent Manipulator, 15 Tactics Used to Control Thoughts Without Force, explores this hidden world and reveals how influence often works beneath the surface of awareness. The journey begins with a simple realization: human beings are emotional creatures long before they are logical ones. Most people like to believe they make decisions based on facts and reason, but emotions often guide choices first, while logic arrives later to justify them. Silent manipulators understand this truth. They know that controlling emotions is often more effective than controlling actions. Instead of forcing behavior, they shape feelings. Instead of issuing commands, they create emotional environments that gently push people toward desired outcomes. One of the most powerful tactics involves creating doubt. A manipulator rarely tells someone they are wrong directly. Instead, they plant small seeds of uncertainty. They ask questions that sound innocent. They make subtle comments that slowly erode confidence. Over time, a person begins questioning their own judgment. They start wondering if their memory is accurate, if their opinions are valid, or if their instincts can be trusted. Once confidence weakens, influence becomes easier. A person who trusts themselves is difficult to control. A person filled with doubt often seeks guidance from the very individual who created the confusion. Another silent tactic relies on the deep human need for approval. Every person wants to feel valued, respected, and accepted. Manipulators recognize this emotional hunger and use it carefully. They offer praise when someone behaves as desired and withdraw affection when they do not. This creates an invisible reward system. The target begins chasing approval without realizing it. They change behavior not because they genuinely want to, but because they fear losing validation. Over time, their choices become less about personal values and more about maintaining acceptance. Fear is another powerful tool. Yet silent manipulators rarely use obvious threats. Instead, they suggest potential losses. They hint at consequences. They create worries about what might happen if certain actions are not taken. Human psychology is naturally sensitive to loss. Studies consistently show that people fear losing something more than they enjoy gaining something of equal value. Manipulators exploit this tendency by focusing attention on risks, dangers, and uncertainties. Once fear takes hold, clear thinking often fades into the background. The book explores how isolation becomes another pathway to influence. Independent thinking grows stronger when people have diverse perspectives around them. Friends, family members, mentors, and trusted communities provide balance. Manipulators understand this. Rather than attacking these relationships directly, they slowly weaken them. They create misunderstandings. They encourage dependency. They position themselves as the only source of understanding and support. As outside influences disappear, their own influence grows stronger. What begins as closeness eventually becomes control. One of the most fascinating lessons involves the tactic of information control. In today's world, people are surrounded by endless streams of news, opinions, content, and advice. Many assume that having more information automatically leads to better decisions. Yet manipulation often occurs not by limiting information completely, but by carefully selecting which information receives attention. If someone only hears one side of a story repeatedly, that version eventually begins to feel like reality. The human brain naturally mistakes familiarity for truth. Repetition creates comfort, and comfort creates belief. The book also examines emotional triggers. Every individual carries fears, insecurities, dreams, and desires. Some people crave recognition. Others fear rejection. Some seek security, while others long for significance. Silent manipulators study these emotional patterns. Once they identify a person's deepest needs, they tailor their influence accordingly. The target feels understood and connected. In reality, their emotional vulnerabilities are being used as leverage. The more personal the trigger, the stronger the influence becomes. Another tactic involves creating urgency. When people feel rushed, they think less critically. They rely on emotion, instinct, and shortcuts. Manipulators know this well. They create artificial deadlines. They suggest opportunities will disappear forever. They imply immediate action is necessary. Under pressure, people often abandon careful analysis. Decisions become reactive rather than thoughtful. What might have seemed suspicious under normal circumstances suddenly appears reasonable in moments of urgency. The power of social proof forms another major theme. Human beings are social creatures. We naturally look to others when deciding what is correct, safe, or acceptable. Manipulators exploit this instinct by creating the appearance that everyone agrees with them. They highlight supportive voices while ignoring opposing perspectives. They present certain ideas as popular, normal, or universally accepted. Once people believe they are standing alone, resistance weakens. Conformity becomes easier than independence. The book reveals how guilt can become a silent chain. Healthy guilt helps people correct mistakes and maintain strong relationships. Manipulative guilt serves a different purpose. It transforms responsibility into obligation. A manipulator reminds others of sacrifices, favors, or emotional investments. They make individuals feel selfish for pursuing personal needs. The target begins prioritizing someone else's desires at the expense of their own well-being. Over time, guilt becomes a tool for controlling behavior without issuing direct demands. Another deeply emotional tactic involves playing the victim. This strategy is especially powerful because compassionate people naturally want to help others. Manipulators may exaggerate hardships, distort situations, or consistently portray themselves as misunderstood. Their goal is not necessarily sympathy itself but influence. When someone feels responsible for another person's suffering, they become easier to guide. Decisions are no longer based solely on logic. They become driven by emotional obligation. The summary also explores the concept of gradual escalation. Rarely does manipulation begin with major requests. Instead, it starts with small commitments. A simple favor, a minor agreement, a tiny compromise. Once a person says yes, they become more likely to say yes again. Human beings value consistency. They prefer actions that align with previous choices. Manipulators understand this psychological tendency and build influence step by step. Each small decision creates momentum toward larger ones. Perhaps one of the most unsettling tactics is the manipulation of identity. People protect beliefs that are connected to their sense of self. If an idea becomes part of someone's identity, challenging that idea feels like a personal attack. Silent manipulators often encourage individuals to adopt labels, groups, or identities that support specific behaviors. Once identity becomes involved, influence becomes remarkably durable. People defend the belief not because it is true, but because it feels connected to who they are. The book highlights how confusion can be used as a weapon. Clear thinking requires mental clarity. When information becomes overwhelming, contradictory, or emotionally charged, the mind struggles to process it effectively. Manipulators may create complexity intentionally. They shift conversations. They introduce distractions. They overwhelm targets with details until resistance weakens. Exhausted minds seek simple answers, and manipulators are always ready to provide them. One of the most emotional lessons involves hope. Hope is beautiful. It inspires resilience, courage, and determination. Yet hope can also be exploited. Manipulators often promise transformation, success, love, acceptance, or fulfillment. They paint vivid pictures of a better future. These promises activate powerful emotions that can overshadow skepticism. People become willing to ignore warning signs because they are emotionally invested in the possibility of a dream becoming reality. As the narrative unfolds, a deeper truth emerges. Manipulation succeeds not because people are weak, but because they are human. The same qualities that make individuals compassionate, trusting, ambitious, and hopeful can also make them vulnerable. The desire for connection, belonging, security, and meaning creates openings that skilled manipulators know how to exploit. Understanding these vulnerabilities is not a reason for shame. It is a source of strength. The final message of the book is surprisingly empowering. Awareness is the greatest defense against silent influence. Manipulation thrives in darkness and confusion. It weakens when exposed to conscious observation. The moment people begin questioning emotional reactions, examining motives, and seeking multiple perspectives, they reclaim power over their own minds. Critical thinking becomes a shield. Self-awareness becomes protection. Emotional intelligence becomes freedom. The Silent Manipulator ultimately reminds readers that true freedom is not simply the ability to make choices. It is the ability to understand why those choices are being made. Every day, countless influences compete for attention, loyalty, and belief. Some seek to inspire growth. Others seek control. The challenge is learning to recognize the difference. When people understand the hidden tactics that shape thoughts and emotions, they stop being passive participants in their own lives. They become conscious decision makers. They learn to trust their judgment while remaining open to evidence. They learn to value empathy without surrendering independence. Most importantly, they discover that the strongest mind is not the one that resists every influence, but the one that can recognize influence clearly and choose its path deliberately. In the end, the greatest lesson is simple yet profound. The silent manipulator gains power only when awareness is absent. The moment awareness awakens, the spell begins to break. And when people learn to see clearly, think independently, and understand the forces acting upon them, they reclaim the most valuable possession they have, their own mind. Awareness, however, is not something that arrives once and stays forever. It is a daily practice. The world constantly presents new forms of influence, many of them far more sophisticated than those of the past. Technology has amplified the reach of persuasion. Social media feeds, advertisements, news headlines, entertainment, and even casual conversations are designed to capture attention and shape perception. The silent manipulator no longer exists only in personal relationships. It can now appear through screens, algorithms, and carefully crafted messages that reach millions of people at once. This reality makes self-awareness more important than ever. Every thought that enters the mind deserves examination. Every strong emotional reaction deserves curiosity. Whenever a message creates sudden anger, fear, excitement, or urgency, it is worth asking a simple question: who benefits if I believe this? That question alone can reveal hidden motives and expose attempts at manipulation that might otherwise remain invisible. The book emphasizes that emotional mastery is not about suppressing feelings. Emotions are valuable signals. They provide insight into needs, values, and experiences. Problems arise only when emotions become the sole basis for decision-making. Silent manipulators understand that people in highly emotional states often overlook details they would normally notice. Anger narrows focus. Fear exaggerates threats. Excitement ignores risks. Sadness seeks comfort. By recognizing these emotional states, individuals can create space between feeling and action. In that space lies freedom. One of the most empowering ideas presented is the concept of mental sovereignty. Just as nations protect their borders, individuals must protect their minds. Mental sovereignty means taking responsibility for what enters consciousness. It means choosing information sources carefully. It means questioning assumptions rather than accepting them automatically. It means recognizing that every belief should be strong enough to withstand examination. This does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. Constant distrust creates isolation and anxiety. Instead, the goal is balanced awareness. Trust should be given thoughtfully rather than blindly. Respect should be earned rather than assumed. Influence should be evaluated rather than accepted automatically. The strongest individuals are neither cynical nor naive. They are observant. The book also explores the role of confidence. Genuine confidence acts as a natural defense against manipulation. People who know their values, understand their goals, and trust their judgment are less likely to be controlled by external pressures. They can listen to opposing opinions without feeling threatened. They can receive criticism without collapsing into self-doubt. They can say no without guilt when necessary. Confidence does not eliminate influence, but it makes manipulation significantly more difficult. Relationships receive special attention throughout the narrative because many forms of manipulation occur within close personal connections. The people who influence us most are often those closest to us. Friends, partners, co-workers, family members, and authority figures all shape perception in subtle ways. Healthy influence encourages growth, honesty, and independence. Manipulative influence encourages dependency, confusion, and control. Learning to distinguish between the two is one of life's most important skills. A healthy relationship leaves a person feeling stronger over time. It encourages self-respect. It supports independent thinking. It welcomes honest communication. A manipulative relationship often produces the opposite effect. Confidence decreases. Anxiety increases. Personal boundaries become blurred. Decisions feel increasingly driven by obligation rather than genuine choice. These warning signs rarely appear overnight. They emerge gradually, making them easy to overlook unless awareness remains active. The author also discusses the importance of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls designed to keep people out. They are guidelines that protect emotional well-being and personal autonomy. Manipulators frequently test boundaries because boundaries limit control. They push a little further than they should. They ignore small requests. They challenge personal limits. Each successful violation encourages another. Strong boundaries communicate self-respect and make manipulation far less effective. Another powerful lesson concerns silence itself. Many people feel uncomfortable with silence. They rush to explain, justify, defend, or respond. Manipulators often take advantage of this tendency. Yet silence can be a source of strength. A thoughtful pause allows emotions to settle and reasoning to emerge. Decisions made in moments of calm are often wiser than those made under pressure. Silence creates room for reflection, and reflection weakens manipulation. As the journey nears its conclusion, the focus shifts from recognizing manipulators to understanding oneself. This may seem surprising, but it reveals one of the deepest truths in the entire book. The greatest vulnerability is not the manipulator's skill. It is the lack of self-knowledge within the target. When people do not understand their fears, insecurities, desires, and emotional triggers, those vulnerabilities remain available for exploitation. Self-knowledge turns hidden weaknesses into visible realities that can be managed consciously. The process of self-discovery requires honesty. It requires asking difficult questions. What fears influence my decisions? What approval am I seeking? What emotional needs make me vulnerable? What beliefs have I accepted without examination? These questions are uncomfortable, but they lead to freedom. Every answer increases awareness. Every insight strengthens independence. The book ultimately delivers a message of hope rather than fear. Yes, manipulation exists. Yes, people will always attempt to influence thoughts, emotions, and decisions. But awareness changes everything. A person who understands the mechanics of influence is far less likely to become trapped by it. They can recognize emotional triggers. They can identify hidden agendas. They can separate facts from persuasion. Most importantly, they can choose their responses intentionally rather than react automatically. True power is not controlling others. True power is controlling oneself. It is the ability to remain calm when others want a reaction. It is the ability to think clearly when others create confusion. It is the ability to stand firmly in personal values when others apply pressure. This form of power cannot be taken away because it comes from within. The Silent Manipulator leaves readers with a lasting realization. The mind is one of the most valuable things a person possesses. Every belief, decision, and action begins there. Protecting the mind is not an act of paranoia. It is an act of responsibility. The world will always contain voices competing for attention. Some will guide. Some will inspire. Some will attempt to control. The challenge is learning to listen without surrendering independence. When awareness becomes a habit, manipulation loses much of its strength. The hidden becomes visible. The subtle becomes obvious. The emotional becomes understandable. And once a person can see clearly, they gain something more valuable than certainty. They gain freedom. That freedom is not the absence of influence. It is the ability to choose which influences deserve a place in your life. It is the courage to think independently while remaining open-minded. It is the wisdom to trust yourself without becoming closed to learning. In a world filled with silent manipulators, that freedom becomes one of the greatest forms of strength a human being can ever possess.